Hello, my name is Hafsa, and for my presentation, I'm going to walk through a recent cybersecurity attack that occurred at a water treatment plant in Florida. So when we think about breaches or hacks in cybersecurity, some of the most common events we associate with them is data being stolen or sold, especially when they involve big companies such as Google or Facebook. These attacks usually involve the theft of information or passwords, or even the release of code as we saw in the recent Twitch hack. So to highlight a security breach that we don't see as commonly or is not as typically used as an example of security breaches, but is still important for us to pay attention to, I want to discuss the hacking of a water treatment plant in Florida. So in February of this year, hackers were able to take remote control of a plant operator's machine at the Oldmar Water Treatment Facility in Pinellas County, Florida. After gaining access, they raised the levels of lye in the water from 100 to about 11,000 parts per million. According to a report done by NBC News, levels that are higher than 10,000 can lead to difficulty swallowing, vomiting, abdominal pain, and potentially even damage to the gastrointestinal tract. Fortunately, a plant operator noticed the change and quickly reset the levels, and no damage was done to the plant or the town's water. So although no one was hurt, this attack is critical for us to study for a number of reasons. First, it is important to note that this is not the only attack to occur at a water treatment facility, and I wanted to mention three major attacks in the last 2 decades. The first was the Maroochy Shire wastewater incident that occurred in 2000. At a wastewater plant in Australia, a disgruntled employee successfully hacked into the waste management system and caused more than 1 million liters of untreated sewage water to be released into waterways and local parks. Although I will mainly discuss US water treatment facilities in my presentation today, I included this example to emphasize that this issue is not limited to one country or region, and the consequences can be severe regardless of location. Another attack occurred in 2013 at a small dam north of New York City. An attacker gained access through a poorly configured modem, and they would have been able to release water from behind the dam if the gate had not been manually disconnected for maintenance at the time of the intrusion. The last one I'll mention is the Kamui water system, where in 2016, attackers hacked the water treatment plant and gained access to the system that controls the levels of chemicals used to treat drinking water. Although they modified the chemical control for adding water treatment chemicals, no meaningful change on water composition occurred. And investigators believe this is because the hackers actually may not have realized the extent to which they had infiltrated the system. So attacks on water treatment plants are not a rare occurrence, and they're likely to continue to occur. NBC's report on the attack stated that the US's 54,000 or so drinking water systems are run independently by either local governments or small corporations. That means that there are thousands of different security setups, often run by generalists who are responsible for the technology of their particular systems. Furthermore, a cybersecurity expert who was consulted after the attack stated that the practice of setting up a computer program to allow users to take control of sensitive industrial systems is extremely common in industrial systems that don't really have the means to employ staffs of experts to be on call for at all hours. What I want to emphasize here is that these water treatment facilities are vital to maintaining a constant flow of safe, clean drinking water across the country. Even though systems in more populated cities or towns have better security, many of the country's plants don't have updated security systems. A successful attack on any of these plants could have life-threatening consequences, so it is important for us to analyze how hackers were able to gain access to this particular plant in Florida so that we can prevent similar attacks from occurring in the future. So before I get to the actual attack vector, I want to provide some perspective on the state of the water treatment facility and also reiterate a couple of the concepts we discussed in class that played an important role in the attack. The first thing to understand is why facilities such as water treatment plants might be vulnerable to attackers. They are generally older or just simply don't have sufficient security infrastructure. If the systems aren't secure but internet is accessible, there can be breaches. Next, we need to understand how remote access works. We talked about remote access in class when discussing authentication end topics and covered how hardware tokens can be used alongside challenge response and synchronized passcode protocols to authenticate users. For this attack, I will talk about TeamViewer, a remote access and remote control software first released in 2005. Also, with the greater use of remote access during the COVID-19 pandemic, it is important to understand that remote access has some trade-offs and can increase cybersecurity exposure. Finally, we learned in our lectures that passwords have their pros and cons. They are well understood, everyone knows how to use them, they're easy to use, and they don't really require any extra hardware. However, as I will discuss in the next couple of slides, they are easy to attack and difficult to use well. To give a sufficient explanation of the attack vector, I will first give a basic summary of the attack and then outline 4 weak points in the site security, and then finish up with a sequence of steps that the attackers took to pull this off. So for a quick overview, the Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition Network, SCADA, was compromised using the remote access software TeamViewer. No exploits were used, meaning the attack wasn't a malware-based attack. Essentially, the attackers gained unauthorized access to the system and were manually changing set points. They didn't need to exploit any vulnerabilities, and the attack wasn't specifically based for one control system or the other. Now, onto the weak points in security. First, TeamViewer was originally installed to allow for status checks and troubleshooting of alarms or other issues, but it had not been used in about 6 months. So because TeamViewer was still on the network, attackers were able to leverage it and use it to establish the remote access. Next, each computer used to monitor the system remotely had a single password. There was also no firewall separating the SCADA network from the internet. Basically, any device could be used if you knew the password and what system you were trying to gain access to, which is how an attacker could establish remote connection with TeamViewer. And finally, the site had an aging Windows OS, meaning their software was not up to date with the current standards at the time. Basically, by using common scanning tools designed to search the internet for control system protocols, looking for exposed endpoints, it would not really have been that difficult for attackers to identify that there was a potential connection to the network and launch an attack. As for the actual sequence of steps taken to pull off the attack, it was surprisingly simple. First, the attackers gained remote access by logging into TeamViewer. Although information about the password was not provided, it is likely that it was either brute forced or easily guessed. Remember that the same password was used for each computer that remotely monitored the system. The attackers actually broke in at least twice. The first intrusion was fleeting and it did not set off any red flags because remote access was sometimes used to monitor the system or troubleshoot problems. However, hours later, the attackers returned, and this is when they changed the Lye concentration to dangerous levels. And then after doing so, the attackers immediately exited the system. So now that you know how the attack occurred, I want to discuss some of the consequences. To cover who or what was affected and the different responses to the attack, I'm going to focus on the following 4 points that cover the primary, secondary, and tertiary forms of harm that occurred. So first, what was the actual impact or damage from the attack? The attackers changed the levels of lye in the system to dangerous amounts. Lye is commonly used to control pH and minimize lead count. So at the level that it was changed to, there could have been serious illnesses and major pipe damage. However, the operator was able to manually correct the change. And also the site has pH alarms throughout the system. So even if the operator had not reset the levels, workers would have been alerted before damage could be caused. As for who the attackers were, investigators still actually do not know who took remote control of the system. It is possible that they came from a wide range of different skills, so not necessarily a nation-state attack, and it could have been done either externally or internally. However, if it had been more sophisticated, the consequences likely would have been a lot more severe. As for the changes made after the attack, the remote access system used to make the change was disabled, and the city did make further upgrades to the system. The FBI's field office in Tampa has agents working with the city and the sheriff's office to find the attackers. Finally, a consequence that might not be as obvious as first, but is actually very significant, is the public reaction to the attack. Even though no harm came to the people, to which the Oldsmar facility supplies water to, the possibility of someone tampering with the water supply is kind of frightening. If the general public becomes unsure if their water is safe to use or drink, it could have a lot of other economic and social impacts. So this breakthrough in security at the Oldsmar facility was honestly a very simple attack, which makes it more alarming, but also a good incident to learn from. So I want to finish up my presentation by highlighting the three main takeaways from this attack. First is that many water systems are very vulnerable to cyber attacks, and a successful attack can have severe health and safety impacts. I mentioned in my introduction how security breaches against large companies are often seen in the news, and although it is still important to discuss those attacks, attacks on systems that can have like a direct impact on public health and safety should be given more coverage and emphasis. Second, this attack is not just relevant to water systems and critical infrastructure, but to any site that uses remote access. Despite its many benefits, remote access can pose a serious risk if it is not implemented correctly, and there needs to be a serious assessment of facilities that use remote access that could impact public access to essential resources. Finally, this attack did not necessarily require a skilled adversary, and if a not so highly skilled adversary is able to directly change the chemical levels in a water treatment facility, it's entirely possible that a much more competent attacker could have caused significant damage at either the Oldsmar facility or other vulnerable treatment plants like it. So to sum up, the point of this presentation is not to say that anybody can hack into our water treatment facilities or that we should be distrusting of the water that we have access to. The water treatment plants near where most of us live, Chapel Hill, Raleigh, Durham, are likely very secure. However, there are thousands of water treatment facilities across the country, and not all of them have the funding or other resources for updated security systems. It is essential that we focus on updating the security capabilities of those facilities, and hopefully we can prevent future attacks on our water supply from occurring. So these are the sources that I used to research and present on this attack. I hope that you gained some insight into the vulnerabilities in some of our essential infrastructure systems, and I want to end with the following two questions to emphasize what we should think about in the aftermath of this attack. First, what are the trade-offs of implementing systems that rely on remote access? With more systems than ever relying on remote access due to the pandemic, we need to be extra careful with the security of those remote connections. In setting up secure systems, there will always be trade-offs between usability and security. So it is important that we consider the implementation of remote access with more caution. My second question considers a more societal and procedural perspective. Part of the reason the attackers gained access to the Oldsmar facility so easily is because of the site using the same password for the computers used for remote access. After taking this class, this kind of oversight seems easily avoidable, but it's actually far too common in many systems. So how can we implement changes so that glaringly obvious mistakes, such as reused passwords, are not as common in vital facilities? Perhaps requiring training for setting up secure systems or employing independent organizations that review the security systems of these facilities? There are definitely a lot of different ways that we can approach this problem, and it is important that we start implementing some changes soon to avoid future similar attacks.